Hey, welcome back to class, everyone. This is Communication and Research Methods, and I'm Bram Duffy with talking about Chapter 7 in Week 4. And today we're going to be talking about hypothesis and research questions. And we're talking about this because we're going through some of the steps together in class of building a research study. And this is the stage that you're in for your discussion board this week that's required. You will be writing out your hypothesis and research questions. So stick through to the right at the end where we'll be able to talk about the assignment. But in general, gosh, what is a hypothesis and what's a research question? And if you come at this from the perspective of a science background, then you might have a more strict definition of these areas. And so let's talk about it. When it comes to research, developing a clear roadmap of what you're going to do in that research plan is really important. And that's just exactly where this whole research question and hypothesis stuff comes into play. Because they're tools that don't just guide the research process, they also help construct a coherent study. They build a framework. And in general, are what allow us to have valuable insights in the field. Now, research questions serve as the foundation of any study because that's what's going to address the what and address the why of the research. It sets the stage for whatever you're trying to explore through saying, what is going on? Why are we here doing this, right? So that's what the research question is doing, is the what and the why. The hypothesis is more like a compass. It's like saying, oh, this is what I expect. This is what I think the direction of the study is going. And a hypothesis is something that offers a testable statement, and that's something that can be confirmed or it can be refuted. And that confirming or refuting is fine because that's what builds or takes apart the theoretical assumptions that you might be looking at. And so I want to look with you at some of the different kinds of hypothesis because each kind of hypothesis that you might choose to work with will totally alter the study that you're trying to get at, to what you're trying to seek. And I think it's interesting because it's not just the research method, it's also how you frame the questions that you're going into the study with. The first one to mention as far as types of hypothesis is a null hypothesis. And a null hypothesis is the skeptical kind of hypothesis. It's one that suggests that there's not a relationship between variables that you're studying. So it's like saying that we aim to test against this, but ideally probably reject to prove that a new way would work because we are saying that we don't believe that there's any relationship between the variables. Anytime we're doing research, we are acknowledging or seeing how variables interact. And sometimes those variables involve us as the researcher. And so all of that stuff has to get described openly. So that's the null hypothesis. The research hypothesis is also known as it's also known as an alternative hypothesis, and we call it an alternative hypothesis also because it's kind of like suggesting that there's a significant relationship or a significant difference between variables. So it's like actually pulling out hopes that you're going to make a dramatic discovery there. There's also types of hypothesis that are known as directional hypothesis and non-directional hypothesis. And this is just like saying if you have a non-directional hypothesis, this is like the type of hypothesis that doesn't specify the nature of the relationship. So it's like saying that they are there, but a non-directional hypothesis is not able to expand on what's happening with those variables. A directional hypothesis, though, is something that says, hey, we have an expected direction that we think that the relationship of these variables is going to take. And so we're really specifying a positive direction in the relationship. Is that there? And so in addition to just having a direction hypothesis or a non-directional hypothesis, there's also a causal hypothesis. And a causal hypothesis is like a cause and effect kind of relationship, right? So any kind of cause and effect is a causal kind of hypothesis that we like to think about. Testing differences or relationships between variables is done by using hypothesis. That's what we think about when we think about hypothesis, is what we are working with, all right? Exploring for differences or relationships, though, can be done by either using hypothesis or research questions. So the type of hypothesis or research question that we use really just does depend upon the different aspects, like the aim of the research. Like our aim might be to test something or to explore something. It also might be based on the amount of evidence that we're able to read about and understand from previous studies. Like, to find out if previous results let you make statements that are going to be more precise. So these are the kinds of things that play a role into that. And when we think about developing our own research question, it's important to start out by identifying your own research interest. So there's a broad area of interest within communication studies. And when I think about communication studies, I know that there are things like media influence and intercultural communication, public relations, digital communication, persuasion. It's a very group communication, interpersonal communication. So there's a lot of different aspects. And so within each one of those umbrellas, I would say pick one and say, hey, this is an area I want to study better. And so based on that, go ahead and do a deep dive and look at existing literature. And to do that, I like to kind of go down two routes. When I'm looking for existing literature, I like to use Google Scholar to click in keywords that draw out my interest. And then in doing that, spur ideas to look at things that might give me full text in different areas that I can explore. And you understanding what their research question is and you exploring how they are doing their study will help you understand what you might do in a study that you would create a question for that's related. So we have to consider questions that researchers have previously explored. That way we can figure out what it is that remains unanswered. So that's why I start out with Google Scholar, and then move to commonly, as I get closer and closer to figuring out what it is I want to study, I might move next in to looking at full text articles that I can get that are peer reviewed, and then might even look at dissertations, especially if I can find a dissertation that's recent that has a direct connect with something that I'm interested in, because we have to narrow down your focus. And so based on your literature review, we want you to find something that's interesting and feasible to study. So in doing that, we have to consider what context, what population you want to study. And for example, I study a lot of paramedic communication that has to do with conflict. I also study conflict between managers and workers. And I also, so that's just like one area is conflict. Other areas might have to do with empathy or sympathy. So there are all kinds of different approaches that you can get to find out and understand things about any field, really. And so when we look at refining your question, I want you to be prepared to revise and refine that as you get clarity and focus. So one of the things you're doing this week is writing a question, putting it on the discussion board, and getting feedback from one another. So I want you to be able to lay out and answer questions like, gosh, is this question too broad or too narrow? And also, does that question align with qualitative methodologies? And because we're really looking for quality over like an amount here. And does that give us what we're going for? And also, do we need to reflect more on or expand on the cultural context of the study, or do we need to do a dive down to be more specific about what type of population or specific situation that we're going to study? So these are all things to consider. And I want you just in general to try to avoid questions that are too broad. And also, we're not looking for binary yes or no answer questions. We have to know that qualitative research thrives on complexity. So we are thinking about time constraints and feasibility here, and ask yourself what's important, especially as you go through figuring out what you want to study and what you want to explore. You could ask, well, how's this aspect going to contribute to our understanding of communication? So I'm going to read off some sample research questions in different categories to help us kind of think through what it is to create a research question to do communication and qualitative research. So in a interpersonal communication category, we might ask, how do nonverbal cues influence the dynamics of conflict resolution in close relationships? How do nonverbal cues influence the dynamics of conflict resolution in close relationships? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, how do nonverbal cues, so how do people interact with each other using their nonverbal expressions, how does that influence what happens when we try to resolve conflict when people are close to each other? That's what we're getting at there. So is that possible within the bounds of this type of study? That would probably be too broad, but it is a good example of something that we might look to study. Another example I have, in what ways do cultural differences impact listening behaviors in interpersonal communication? So in what ways do cultural differences impact listening behaviors in interpersonal communication? So what we're doing is we're thinking about how people listen how people listen differently depending upon what culture they come from and how they communicate. And so is that something that's researchable? And how would you do that? Because we're looking at the feasibility, right? Also in interpersonal communication, I have an example. How do communication tools affect the development of trust in long-distance friendships? How do communication tools affect the development of trust in long-distance friendship? So these are things that we might be able to break down and get a better understanding of if we had a sample audience of folks who all were participating in long-distance relationships, right? So we would go out and look for a sample population of people who would fit that criteria. In business communication, what if we asked the research question, how does the use of storytelling in business presentations affect audience engagement? See, by thinking about how we're communicating in a particular aspect of business, we're able to pull together a research question that gets at the heart of something that can be helpful. If we think about health communication, you might ask, how does the use of social media influence perceptions and behaviors regarding preventative health measures, right? So you're able to link or try to link what people think about social media with what they're doing for their own health to prevent having health problems. If we think about the persuasion category, a good research question for the persuasion category might be, in what ways do political campaigns use persuasive communication to shift public opinion? We might also, for persuasion, ask ourselves, how do emotional appeals in advertising affect consumer decision making among students? Right? So that's definitely a close enough question because it's a sizable audience that we can approach. In your assignment this week, I'm asking you to create your own communication research question. Your own. I know you're going to be reading other people's studies and other examples, but I would like for you to develop your own. And to do that, I've described that you have to do some reading, and you have to do some self reflection on what you would like to study, because I'd like for you to share a summary about what you read. And so I'm asking you to write a paragraph this week that explains how the research question lines up with what you read about to prepare for this assignment. So in that respect, you're able to basically share a brief literature review and then actually share your research question. You would propose be your research question, and then cite at least 2 references, right? So you did some reading. I want to hear about your reading that led up to your research question. And then I want to see what your references are in APA format. And then that's your assignment for this week. All right, so post that to the discussion board and then help others by completing responses to classmates before the end of the week. Because being able to develop out these research questions together will be an opportunity for us to explore and help you develop your own research study for your first communication research class. So up and coming next, we have, we're learning how to develop a research question, and we're learning how to put together a hypothesis, because our next assignments after this will be doing efforts towards creating studies. So doing a mini study in ethnography, a mini study in research questionnaires. And so as we dig further and further, I want to say that it's important that you participate by involving your textbook in the work that you're doing to prepare for class, as well as watching the video so that we can stay connected this way. And so I look forward to your assignment this week so that we can engage about your research question that you are going to develop for our class. And I look forward to the discussion board. Thanks, y'all.